Okay, back with you on the Bronx Buzz. Thanks to Eileen for joining us. But we're going to switch gears. Robbie Sequeira had an emergency and could not join us at the last minute. But I am just thrilled because my buddy Juan Rosa, who is the National Director of Civic Engagement at the NALEO Educational Fund, is with us. And we've got some important stuff to talk with Juan about. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you so much, Gary. Pleasure to be here with you.
For people who don't know who and what NALEO is the National Association for Latino Elected and Appointed Officials. But let's talk a little bit about what your real advocacy is right now. And I told you I'm squarely behind it. And that is the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act of New York State. What is it, and why for NALEO is this just that important?
Great. Gary, as you know, since 2013, when the Supreme Court gave its decision on the Shelby County versus Holder decision, it gutted certain provisions of the Voting Rights Act in the United States. Since then, we've seen state after state, jurisdiction after jurisdiction at the national level roll back some protections for voters, especially voters of color, voters whose primary language is not English. And we felt that we needed to be squarely behind the decision here in New York State by State Senator Zelno Marie from Brooklyn and Assemblywoman Latrice Walker, also from Brooklyn, of introducing a state bill that would allow New York State voters from being protected by law at the ballot. And we could talk a little bit more about
Sure.
specific details.
What's interesting, of course, John Lewis, one of the great Congress members of all time, one of the most important figures in racial justice in the United States of America. Is there a difference between the national John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the one that New York State is putting in place? Or did New York State simply say, we like that, we're going to use it for our stuff?
So there is a difference. There's several differences. One of the differences is that, at least in the New York State case, it expands language assistant protections. So right now, under current legislation, only certain counties in New York State are protected. Are obligated to provide certain levels of language assistance. Right. Of
Oh,
course, they're complemented by other local laws. But quite frankly, on the books, only certain counties. As you know, there's a need for language access all throughout the state. If you look at the counties that make up Long Island, if you look at places around big city centers like Rochester,
or
Syracuse,
New York City,
or New York City,
and our home borough, the Bronx. Start there, but that's okay.
it's not there. So one of the really good parts about this bill is that it would expand language assistance throughout the state.
And
So
I gotta ask you this. Let's just start with that. It's so fundamental, and it's so silly to think that New York State will have it. Down in Texas on the border, there are many Hispanic people. In Florida, there are obviously Cubans and people I mean, and then that's only talking Spanish. You talk about the entire Mexican border with Arizona and New Mexico. I mean, these are Americans. And if they don't speak the language, well, they should be able to vote. I mean, the whole thing just blows my mind. So let's start there. Um, so even though we're doing it in New York, I'm still not excusing the other 49 states for not endorsing it. But okay, so that's number one. We got to have it. And listen, let's talk about our diverse borough of the Bronx with Korean and Russian and Chinese and all. I mean, I'm going to leave somebody out because there are too many. Of course, we need expanded language, accessibility for everybody. So that's numero uno. That's the first thing. What else you got?
Número dos, number two.
Very good.
Number two, it flips pre-clearance on its head, right? So at the national level, pre-clearance is a system by which local jurisdictions, especially counties, would have to demonstrate to the Justice Department that laws that are put in place, regulations that are put in place from time to time, don't roll back the rights implemented through the Voting Rights Act. In New York, again, instead of citizens and advocates having to sue the jurisdiction or the city to ensure that they're not being discriminated against, the New York State Voting Rights Act actually makes it so that jurisdictions have to prove that their any changes to their laws or to their election administration practices are not hurting the voting
Oh,
rights of voters of all colors, of
so
all backgrounds.
again, a fundamental thing, you got to be fair. And if it's not fair, don't make us have to sue you, because that becomes a nightmare for all things. You got to pay for a lawyer, you got to do everything else. So that's number two. And what else? There's a third one in there. I think it was the idea of legal tools to fight back against voter suppression. Right? That's what we talked
Right.
about.
It lowers some of the thresholds that you have to prove in order to
Hmm.
prove discrimination. Right. So it gives advocates, it gives ordinary citizens more tools to interpret the law to demonstrate discrimination. Right. Or to demonstrate voter dilution or voter suppression. Right. Whereas the hurdle, again, to the threshold, I guess, to prove discrimination currently is quite high. It will lower the threshold and allow for, again, more easier interpretations, right?
Yeah, easier access, and the threshold is higher, so that currently it's higher. You want to lower it so that if you've been discriminated against, again, it's, they send you through the court system. You don't have to do that. What I really want to know now. So here it is. It sounds logical to me. It sounds like something we need to do. We want all American citizens to have access and to be able to vote. What is anything holding it up, or you're just advocating it now to make sure it passes through the legislature during this session?
Well, the legislation was first introduced in 2020
Right.
by Selnor Marie again, and it gained a lot of traction in the state senate, but not in the state assembly here in New York.
Well, now that's ironic, because a lot of these, I mean, it's almost flipped from the way you would think, even though we do have a Democratic majority in the Senate. What or who is holding it up in the Assembly?
Yeah. So for us, the work that we've done is to educate the elected officials, and certainly we've had very good elected officials in the Bronx that have been behind this from day one. We
Right.
have the newer members of the assembly, like Assemblywoman Judelka Tapia, Assemblymember Kenny Burgos, who've certainly been behind this. Judelka, Assemblywoman Tapia, right from the beginning of her tenure,
I can't imagine Amanda Septimo is not behind it.
and Amanda Septimo, obviously Jeff Dinowitz. So we have some of the the Bronx All Stars
That's who we are.
have joined and been supported. But we've had to do some education, right? I don't think I don't believe that it's been opposition, but rather the lack of prioritization, right? So we've had to
Ah.
go out and say, look, we don't really see Congress moving anytime soon to remediate the
Oh,
process, to
no,
remediate,
I understand that. So, in
right?
other words, they have many things. Listen, the Health Act is out there. Obviously, they're going to deal with the budget for the next a week or two to get that done. But you want to say, let's put this on the table and make sure it passes.
Right. And to be quite honest, there's been since 2020, there's been a lot of progress in the way the New York State administers elections. For example, the expansion of our absentee voting rules has been a welcomed change. We needed to do it for the pandemic, but it's sticking around. So that's a positive development. The introduction of early voting, the way that people have 9 days before election day to vote. That's a big change, and it allows more people with schedules, work and life schedules that are not as flexible to participate in democracy. So we've seen a lot of change in New York State. So we're not beating anyone over their head, right? There's been
Right.
a lot of positive change,
Right. But you want
but
to keep the momentum going and have this be another, brick in the
right.
wall, so to speak.
Right, and you know that a lot President Biden, when he was candidate Biden, really championed voting rights as one of the things that he
Yep.
would work on day one. And as we've seen, other things have taken priority. Now with the status of our foreign affairs, with the war in Ukraine, and what it means, we just don't see voting rights moving forward in at the
Right.
federal level,
It
and
it
it adds urgency to us doing it here in New York State.
Listen, and these days he's also got the Supreme Court nomination that they're pushing. And what you say is really a revelation for a lot of people. Say, well, it's totally logical. Let's just get it passed. But with all the other things going on, these kinds of things tend to move down the priority scale. And now it's what Naleo and what you were saying is now it's just as important as anything else.
Absolutely, and the other important piece of this, Gary, is that New York can set the example. New York can lead the way. Uh,
I love that.
some of these things would be a pioneering, right? Some of this, our rules around pre-clearance, for example, it would really set a standard for other states around the nation to adopt. It's not only that it's timely, again, because we just don't see Congress taking action, but it's also a fact that New York has an opportunity to set the standard for other states in how we should be looking at voting rights protection at the state level.
Juan, what would the timing be like? Let's just hypothesize that they're going to pass this, sometime this spring. Could it be in place in time for the June primaries, or is really the goal is to just get it done and then it'll go all the way around till November? Got about a minute left, so let's get to it.
We at the NALEO Educational Fund would like this measure to pass as soon as possible. Obviously, the state has to pass a budget by April 1st. This bill does have budgetary implications because it requires money
Oh,
for the state attorney general's office to open up a new office to look at pre-clearance, to include a depository of information. So it does have budgetary
got
implications.
Got to do it now. Just do
Got
it
to do
now.
it now.
Put it in the budget. So that's the point. I guess I'm going to say for you, write to your assembly member, write to your senator, write to the governor, make a phone call and say we support the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Act in New York State. Right. That's the message.
That simple, Gary. It's that simple.
And if you have questions, you just get to Naleo, and you guys will support all the efforts.
Absolutely.
Great. Juan R. Rosa, National Director of Civic Engagement at the NALEO Educational Fund. And that's all for the Bronx Buzz for tonight. We thank Eileen for joining us. We thank Juan for joining us. We hope Robbie will join us sometime soon. And we'll see you next week. Good night.